Welcome, Amanda Nedham. Thanks for agreeing to participate in this virtual studio visit as part of OCAD-U and the University of Art London's collaboration for Art Toronto. I wonder, Amanda, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and maybe telling us a bit about your work and also where you are on the planet and anything else that might be helpful.
Sure. Hi. Nice to talk to you, Glenn. My name is Amanda, and I'm happy to be here. I am currently living in Brooklyn, New York. I am a writer, curator, and artist, and the co-founder of Super Duchess Gallery, which is an experimental curatorial platform in the Lower East Side, Manhattan. I did my BFA at OCAD University in printmaking, where I was the medal winner, and then I went on to do my MFA in painting at RISD in Providence, Rhode Island.
Wonderful. It's nice. It's nice to see the connections, how people from OCAD, where they go and how they come back. And so I'm very pleased to be a part of this conversation. We've billed this as a studio visit, in part as a gesture of continuity. That this is what we would like to be doing. I would love to come and visit the gallery or visit the studio and talk to you face to face, but obviously, with COVID-19 and all of the issues that's creating, that's not as easy as it should be. And so we're also calling it a studio visit in recognition of the disruption and how this is impacting artists and artistic practice specifically. You know, the question in a sense comes out of recognizing disruptions to international exhibition opportunities or even local exhibition opportunities, travel, research trips, speaking tours, attendance at openings, access to locations, access to individual studios. So I wondered if you'd just reflect on how your sense of studio has morphed with the pressures of a global pandemic and health crisis, and what you've kind of learned over the last 8 or 9 months. And maybe you could, in keeping with the studio idea, share some images of your work. Would you mind doing that?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. And I just learned how to do it, so.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so how do I start? Everything is different now. And it took a long time to adjust to the new reality and what a studio is and what a practice is and what a career is even. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay?
Yep, you're coming across loud and clear.
Great. So I mean, I guess I'll just start with some of the work from last year very quickly. Last year I was doing a lot of sculpture installation work, and this year, because of the circumstances and moving my studio to my apartment, I've been focusing a lot on drawing and writing. But my practice has always had a strong memorial lean to it. I'm very interested in what we can learn from the dead. So trying to have conversations with the dead, creating space for that to happen. And I feel like there are things we can learn from the dead only after they've had a little bit of time to sort of think about how they live their lives. So my studio is very research-based and project-based in the sense that the last few years I've focused on different archetypes and really thought about how to contemplate and complicate the legacies of people like primatologists, peacekeepers, and abductees. So what you're seeing here is a chair from a solo exhibition I had in 2019 about Diane Fossey. The show comprised 33 sculptures and drawings as offerings to her spirit to try to coax her out to have a conversation. So here's a chair in faux bronze with a gorilla leg. And yeah, and she was a radical primatologist conservationist and just a really interesting person. And my project with her began after spending 2 years thinking about peacekeeping, and the gateway person for me was Romeo Dallaire, who was the head of operations in Rwanda. And this all came out of I lived in Abu Dhabi for a year to help with fellowship program, and I was really interrogating what it meant to be Canadian and to be able to travel and what sort of those privileges entailed. So That led to a book titled My Boyfriend is a Peacekeeper, which was a book of fake love letters from an imaginary peacekeeper boyfriend. And it spawned a number of sculptural works that I've shown in the US and in Taiwan and in the UAE. So here's an aloe plant and some small soap and cigarette animals. I'm sort of riffing off things that you'd be anywhere, any place. So sort of plein air sculpture. So I'll just quickly go through a few more. Here's kind of a standalone aloe plant made from paper mache and graphite. It's smoking. It's sort of the symbol of healing is sort of given up. And then a little bit out of order. But the last large sculpture that I made was in 2019, and it is a memorial to Lee Miller, who was the only female war combat photographer during World War II, a former model, and just another really interesting person. And so I was thinking about her and created this memorial bathtub, employing aloe plants again for that sort of borrowing that symbol of healing. So
beautiful. And I like these, that the way that your work calls upon different times and different spaces, but with strong women artists and thinkers. I guess what I'm curious about in part is there's a certain kind of mobility. You know, Lee Miller is a good example, was able to travel around and went places that most women didn't go in terms of war photography. Or Diane Fossey, same way, traveling. How do you think about this body of work or your work in relation to the current restrictions on our mobility?
Well, it's a really interesting question. Well, especially because I think I was drawn to these people, these sort of strangers, because they seemed like lonely people who went very far away to have these types of experiences that very much fundamentally shifted how they see morality and how they define these parameters of I don't know, like very subjective belief systems almost. So I spent obviously years and a lot of time thinking about what it means to go away and to radically rethink things, and then to be forced to stay home for a year and not be able to travel and do the same type of research or even see my family. We've had to really rethink things and reassess things, like from our studios and apartments, in a way that is more practical and in the way that we're going to be having to live with moving forward.
Interesting. One of the themes of Art Toronto this year is this idea of, I'm not going to say it properly, but a certain kind of relocation, dislocation. Artists who are working in places that may not be home spaces, or that working in ways that make us conscious of our geographic location and the limits on those. You know, to talk about working in Abu Dhabi, you're very conscious of traveling there, being there, everything about that as a kind of certain type of process that many of us are used to as we move globally. But I wonder how this impacts you. You know, you talked about being coming from OCAD, moving to New York. The restrictions on you coming back to Canada to visit your folks. What would you say about the impact of this on the work that you're making these days? Is it something you're thinking about, or is it just a fact of life?
So before the pandemic, I was doing some work at the Lower East Side print shop, and I burnt before I left a screen that had the image of a drawing of funerary flowers on it. And I took it home and didn't know that would be the last screen that I would burn before I couldn't go back for, 8 months or so. And then also my studio became a place that didn't feel safe. So I went in and I brought a bunch of panels back to my apartment and decided to work in my apartment. And I was using cat litter and dog food to weigh down my screen for printing on the kitchen floor. And there were definitely limitations, but they were limitations that felt kind of liberating after I started making work again. And I think like a lot of people, we just didn't make work for a while because it seemed, I don't know, it just seemed so irrelevant in a lot of ways, and trying to figure out what was worth making art about when everything was so scary. So I lived 2 blocks from Wyckoff Heights Hospital, which was the hospital where the first person passed from COVID in Brooklyn in March. And so just everything was just like really, really scary. And having a dog, I had to go out every day. And so I refer to these drawings as refrigerator drawings because my boundaries at the time were defined by like the hum of the refrigerator in my apartment and then the hum of the refrigerated morgue trucks at the hospital. So it was a space that it took a lot of adjusting, but once I started making work again and my friends started making work again, we turned to Zoom and we would have these critiques, which were really therapeutic in the sense that we weren't so much evaluating works of art so much as we were using the art as objects to talk about our shared experience. So this was one of the first ones I did. And the image, the face is borrowed from Wilson from the movie Castaway. I think we were all sort of feeling very alone at the time. So this one is 24 by 48. And there are some holes that have been drilled into it, just sort of trying to create something matter of fact about the drawing. So.
Well, oh, these are wonderful, and I love the way that you're shifting your focus in that extremely local, but extremely fraught geography that you describe between the hums of 2 refrigeration devices. Maybe you've alluded to it, and maybe I can shift the focus to another context that we're thinking and working within, and that's the kind of the larger cultural context of what we might call systemic injustices.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that not only has COVID-19 drawn attention to vulnerability of marginalized and disenfranchised groups, people in care, people in prisons, people in congregate settings, but also at the same time, the impact on BIPOC communities has come to the fore, both in relation to a health crisis, but also a much deeper, much bigger crisis around systemic injustices, particularly for Black and Indigenous communities. And rightfully so, this has had an impact on the art world, that galleries, funding bodies, universities are facing criticism, are attempting to think through and position themselves in a way that addresses the systemic racisms and everyday violences, microaggressions to macroaggressions that unfortunately define a lot of contemporary art practice. And it's hard to talk about this time without talking about these two situations in dialogue. The dramatic impact on our everyday access to creativity, creative practice, and art making, and the institutional systemic context in which that work has existed historically, and how these are being jumbled together. I wondered if this is something that you're talking about in your work or your curation, or how do you see the two in dialogue?
Yeah, it's such a big question, an important question, and I think early on for me, and a lot of people that I know, how do I even start it? We'd all been sort of confined and afraid for such a long time, and then there was this call to arms, and all of a sudden we went from being completely alone and isolated to being around, hundreds or thousands of people. And I think that was a really remarkable thing to happen, that in part did because there was just this desire to, like, we've sort of been reassessing, like, the micro of our everyday, and how we're participating in being good citizens and within a community, and helping each other out, and then to have this like terrible opportunity to like actually like show up for it, was something that a lot of people did. And I thought maybe, I think I wanted it to change my practice in a certain way. And I wanted my work to be, again, sort of agile enough to be responsive. But there was a moment where it just felt really honest to separate being a responsive and responsible citizen from an art practice. And especially
interesting, yeah, art
practice, it made sense as something that was interested in sort of collective notions of grief and memorialization. And one thing that I did see and was really energized by, like amidst all of, I mean, New York was really crazy in terms of protests as well, and a lot of it took that on as kind of a full-time job for a while. But it was trying to figure out how to bring those things into the everyday. And I was really heartened by a lot of artists who are making things in order to donate them to raise money for justice organizations. And whether they did it directly or through other organizations, there was this circulation of vibrant matter that kind of created this alternative value system where, how do I describe it? Like it was making things that weren't meant for the art market. And that was really, really exciting. And I don't know if you've read about the Whitney and what happened there, but they canceled their show. That was a large survey of artists who were responding to COVID and to social justice movements because they sort of went about everything wrong. And it became sort of a question of, are they exploiting the artists when they picked up a lot of this work through like really, really cheap means as far as works being donated for charitable causes. So, I mean, there's so much going on, and it's so big, and we're all trying to find a way. There's like this reevaluation of the studio, to go back to the first question, and calibrating for the first time the energy of the studio with justice.
What a really nice way of saying that. And I think maybe to begin to close it down at this point, in a sense, we're just opening it up. And I think given the nature of this conversation and these conversations, that is what the intent is. Mm-hmm. But I think to see them, you've said something really wonderful about the way that it brings social justice and the studio directly into dialogue and kind of entwines them in ways that probably make many people very uncomfortable. But it also does it in a way that you need to respect difference and keep things separate. And I think that parallel set of concerns really does provide an interesting way of thinking about work. Just in closing, do you want to share another image, or maybe we can sign off with?
Yeah, I'll just end with some memorial icons, maybe.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, all that being said, I mean, there's still so much work. Grateful to have the opportunity through Super Duchess, the gallery that I helped to curate through, and the great artists that I work with, to try to figure out how to continue to move forward. You know, so I don't teach, but it's been interesting to see how it's become kind of a meeting place for people and students to come together and have conversations about the future. Because I know that a lot of people, for one or the other reason, are feeling really unsure about the world and their careers and what it means to like issues around representation and like the cost of education. So yeah, I don't know. I think there are parallels and separations, but I think that they can really complement one another.
Amanda, thank you so much for sharing your work, sharing the images, but equally importantly is sharing your thinking about these complicated and in many ways difficult times. So much appreciated. I look forward to meeting in real time in space, either in Toronto or New York, and sitting down actually having a coffee, or better yet, doing a real studio visit. So thank you.
And thank you for your time. You're invited to New York whenever that's an option again.
Okay, well, I think it's an option for me to go your way. I just can't come back or something like that.
Very true.
But we'll look forward to better times. And thanks so much, Amanda.
Okay, take care. Thank you.